as I was saying, August is membership month, and true to every Rotary year, we have a great initiative this year for membership. It's called Each One Bring One. I really like this. The goal is to have each Rotarian bring a new member to Rotary. But here in our district, we're gonna add a step to that. So what I would like is for each Rotarian to bring a visitor to Rotary and show them what we're all about. So that could be a meeting or a great event or some fellowship, whatever you have going on where you feel like somebody you know is somebody who is a Rotarian. They just haven't found their place yet. Then after you do that, follow it up with a chat and ask them what they liked about what they saw and what they experienced and what they didn't like. And then, provided that the situation is right, I mean, if they just didn't like anything, it might be time to just step back. But ask them to become a Rotarian. We hear all the time that people just were never asked. I didn't become a Rotarian because I was never asked. So it's just simply to ask, but start by just visiting them. No expectations, no anything, just bring them with you. And then when you ask them what they didn't like, listen for opportunities that your club can use to remove barriers. You'll hear me talk a lot this year about removing barriers. And one of the reasons I do that is because I 100% would not be sitting here in front of you if our district had not removed barriers for me. As somebody who is currently your district governor in my third year of a PhD program, raising a 4-year-old, currently without a nanny, and running a business, I definitely would not be here if it wasn't for removing barriers. So maybe a potential new member is concerned about the time of day because they have young children. Is there a way your club could include them? Or maybe a potential member shares time between 2 geographic locations. I know in our area, we've got a lot of snowbirds. Does your club have a virtual option? And I know a lot of us do because of COVID, but once we all start to get back in person, is that something your club is still planning to do? Or is there trouble with transportation? Is there a rideshare program available that you could do in your club? There are a lot of people who are Rotarians by character, but not yet by name. They haven't necessarily found a club that fits, or maybe they don't even know that Rotary exists. But as active Rotarians, we want to meet people where they are. I was reading something the other day. I get lost. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I get lost in an Instagram rabbit hole in the evenings. And I read something that said, just because every minute of my time isn't filled doesn't mean I have the capacity to give more. And I was like, oh, and again, I just read my list of things off, right? But one of the things I tried to do for 2021, right before my district governor year started, was to make sure I wasn't overbooking my time. And so I'm very sensitive to that. And I want to make sure that we're not bombarding potential members, but we're removing the barriers to help them become the Rotarians that they possibly already are. They just don't know it yet. So let's do more of the bringing visitors and more removing barriers for people, and really, ultimately, more serving to change lives. So with all of that being said, it is now my pleasure to introduce Sue Storie, who is our current membership chair. I have had the pleasure of working with Sue for several years, probably through my entire Rotary membership in various capacities, assistant governor, literacy chair. She's been a Rotarian since 2006, and she's currently a member of the Passport Club. So please join me in welcoming Sue.
Thank you so much, District Governor Aaron, fellow Rotarians. What a pleasure to be here on our very first noon Zoom honoring Membership Month. As the new district chair for membership, of course, I want to grow the clubs, but I think retention is also important. And I plan to visit as many of your clubs as possible virtually, hoping to hear what your concerns are so that we can remove those barriers. As Aaron mentioned, there are barriers for sure. And I'd like to make sure that in retention, we think about engaging the members. Members can be engaged by many ways, including the online meetings, including service projects, and we can share our best practices. I believe the membership chair is a conduit where I can take things that are working in one club and share them with another club. So I'm hoping you will reach out to me. I'm very optimistic about the year ahead. We've had challenges and we rose above those challenges. Most of our clubs were meeting online, and there were some great service projects despite our social distancing. So in the upcoming year, we hope that we will be able to do even more. I'd also like to share with you some information that Toastmasters has provided that is free to us as Rotarians. Yes, other people pay for this, but we get these projects free of charge. And there's a huge potential in working through the Toastmaster projects because we want to share our message, don't we? We want to tell other people why Rotary is so great and why they should be Rotarians. When you work through some of those projects, you may find that you now have a voice and that you can share your passion with others. In addition, if you happen to visit some Toastmaster clubs, there are a lot of potential Rotarians there. As Erin said, they just don't know it. So we can share that with them. So this year, please invite me to your club. And together we can work on what will make your club grow even more. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Neil Dunsmore lives service above self. He is both a Rotarian and a Toastmaster. After completing a 531-kilometer walk to promote mental health awareness, he still continues to walk the talk. He presents his message in clubs such as ours, in Toastmasters, in Rotary, and in the community. And a little bit about Neil. He is an award-winning speaker and a former corrections officer and a hostage crisis negotiator with the Ministry of Correctional Services. He has been a business owner, a salesman, and is currently a Township of Centre Wellington councillor. Since his days in corrections, Neil has been a mental health advocate and is the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Reflections in the Ripple. It chronicles his journey of 531 kilometers. This was a journey to start a conversation around mental health and suicide and to erase the stigma that prevents so many people from getting the help and reaching out and accessing help they so desperately need. Neil is an active Toastmaster who has won district contests for humorous speeches, for evaluations, and has competed 6 times at the district international speech contest, coming in 2nd this year. He is an active Rotarian and has received his Paul Harris Fellow twice. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Neil Dunsmore.
Thank you so much, Sue. What I'd like to do now is take you back to a day that will live in infamy. It happened on Capitol Hill. No, it wasn't January 6, 2021, and it wasn't that Capitol. It was our Capitol, Parliament Hill, September 27th, 2020. It was the end of a 531 kilometer, 795,184 step journey. And something so unexpected was happening to me. As I looked up at those majestic Parliament buildings and I saw the flags waving, I was overcome with emotion. At one point, the tears were streaming down my cheeks and dripping from my chin. I looked over at my good friend, Senator Robert Black, who had walked the last 5 kilometers with me, as well as the 40 people behind him. I said, "Does this view ever get old?" He said, "No, but I don't get quite as choked up as you." And I realized it wasn't the view, and it wasn't the fact that my walk was coming to an end. It was the people I met along the way. It was the people who helped me get here. I was thinking about them at that moment. People on the trail who had their own mental health issues. But most of all, the people who at the right moment reached out to help me through some of the darkest moments. Like the day the walk was going to the dogs. I was coming down a country road and I could hear them before I could see them. But when they came into view, I realized they're a pack and they're organized. They sent the cute, cuddly one in first with the big brown eyes and the floppy Cocker Spaniel ears. I almost fell for it. "Hey, gorgeous, look at..." Wait a minute. Where are your friends? I looked around. I was surrounded. I looked back just in time to see the largest one lunge for my leg. I barely got my walking stick in the way. And that's when things went crazy. There were teeth slashing and gashing. There was growling and howling. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the dogs might have been making noise too. Madam Chair, fellow Rotarians, I thought for sure my 531-kilometer journey was going to end right there and then. And it would have, except for 2 things. First, the owner bellowed, "Here now," and the beast bolted. Second, my cell phone rang. And as my legs turned to rubber and I stumbled to walk, I answered the phone, and it was the calming voice of a fellow Rotarian, Norman. Norman talked, and I continued to walk until I saw my support vehicle. And that day ended the way I had planned it to. In that moment, Norman's presence, his calm voice, helped me push past the fear. In that moment, Norman was everything to me. That story, less the dogs, would play out time after time. It seemed that every time I ran into trouble, doubted myself, or was about to give up, somebody would reach out. Up near Tweed, which was just past the halfway mark, the trail turned nasty. I had been walking lovely recreation trails for most of it, sometimes beside a highway, which was scary, but most of it, and I'm very proud to say this, recreation trails sponsored by various Rotary clubs all across this province. It was heartwarming to see the sign, Caledon East Trail, sponsored by the Caledon Rotary Club. Well-groomed trails. Tweed needs a Rotary Club. They let everybody and anybody on that trail, including motorcycles and ATVs. And they had beaten the trail up so bad, walking was dangerous. Now, as a man with one replaced knee and the other one in a brace tied tightly, I was struggling. The uneven surface caused my knee to tweak constantly. The pain was shooting. I was more than halfway through, and that little voice started in my ear. Nobody will think poorly of you, Neil. You're 330 kilometers into it. That's a heck of a journey. Pack it in. This pain is too much. It really started to wear on me. And for the first time in that 22-day journey, I stopped, opened my backpack, and took the pain medication that my doctor gave me in case of emergencies. I was pulling out my cell phone to call my son. It's over. I'm done. It's time to go home, son. Come get me. You can drive right down the trail. The ATVs are coming down. The hunting trucks are coming down. Just get me home. Just as I went to hit the button to call Graham, my cell phone rang. It was Don Valerie from my Rotary Club. Don's a very busy man with 3 businesses, and he's on every volunteer board he can get his hands on. He is a living, breathing legend, the service above self. And yet somehow, in the middle of that busy life, he said he felt something in here speaking to him to, hey, I wonder how Neil's doing. Don called me. He says, how you doing, bud? Donna, I'm done. I can't take the pain anymore. And he very calmly started talking to me. You see, Don's had 9 knee surgeries and both of them have been replaced. He's a bit of an expert on knee pain. And with one simple question, he solved my problem. 300 plus kilometers, Neil, your leg has probably changed. Do me a favor, stand up straight, look down at your knee brace, put your hand across the middle of your knee. I did that. He says, is the hinge in line or is it below or above your knee? I was shocked. It was a good inch below the pivot point of the knee. Neil, you're fighting your own knee brace. Happens all the time when the muscles change. Take the knee brace off for a bit, put it back on and readjust it. And then Don stayed on the line as I walked. We talked for about an hour. I put the brace back on, readjusted it. Now, we can argue all day. Was it Don's voice, Don's knowledge that stopped the pain? Or had the Percocets finally kicked in? Either way, I was still on my way and I didn't give up because yet again, somebody's presence in my life helped me persevere through the pain. There were moments like that where Rotarians put themselves aside, put aside their busy days and reached out to call me almost on a daily basis, just to help me persevere. It was a group effort between myself and my Rotary Club. And what my Rotary Club has taught me over the years is service above self is the true meaning of life. And I was happy one day on the trail where I got the opportunity to see that firsthand. It was a long day, and I had been experiencing signs of bears for 3 or 4 days now. And on this day, as I looked down to watch where I was planting my foot, I kept seeing bear scat all over. I began to get nervous. Alone in the woods on a trail, meeting a bear could be one of the most dangerous things. Imagine the horror when I looked up and down the trail and I saw it at the side of the trail by the blueberry bushes. I remembered my grade 12 outdoor ed class where they taught us, if you come upon a bear, make sure you make lots of noise because bears are more afraid of you than you are of them. So make noise. If they know you're coming, they'll run away. Ka bear, ka! The bear didn't move. That's when I remembered lesson 2. Make yourself look as big as possible while making that noise. So I took my walking sticks, I put my reflective vest on top, heaved them up and put them in the backpack. So now I looked like I was 8 feet tall. Look at me, bear. Come on, bear. I'm big and I'm scary. Move, bear. The bear did not move. I pulled the bear spray out and removed the safety. And then I took my hunting knife out, just in case he was the one bear in the world not affected by spray. Some of you are probably thinking, why didn't you just turn around? The nearest road was over 2 hours behind me. And to go back 2 hours and around this bear was going to be way more time than I could afford. I've always been told when you're fatigued, you can make stupid decisions. So I made one of those stupid decisions and I carried on. Come on, bear, get out of my way. Holding the knife up as though he could tell what it was. Holding the bear spray up to scare the bear. I made all kind of noise and the bear didn't move. This was going to be a battle. But as I got closer and closer, and the bear came in a clearer vision. You see, what I haven't told you yet is I wear glasses for distance. Not now because you're only 14 inches away from me and I can see everything clear. But I had lost my glasses in the trailer after one long, tiring day, and I hadn't found them yet. So when I got to within 100 feet of this bear that I had prepared to battle, imagine the shock and horror when it turned out to be a woman. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to insinuate you were as big as a bear. I've lost my glasses and I can't see. I put the knife back in its sheath. I put the safety back on the bear spray and reholstered it. I said, you must think I'm an idiot. There was no answer. There was no communication. She sat there on her backside with her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. Now, I spent 10 years working at a maximum security detention center. And one thing I learned to recognize quickly is fear. And this woman was afraid. I moved to the other side of the trail to give us our 6 feet COVID separation. I pulled up my stool and I sat down. I rolled her a water bottle because she looked exhausted and thirsty. And then I ended up giving her most of my lunch, asking her if she was okay, asking her her name. No communication from her at all. I noticed that she kept looking down the trail. So I said to her, whatever it is that has been hurting you, that you're afraid of, is back there. Me, I'm walking this way. You made a decision this morning. Why don't we go together? You and me. You just keep walking. And she did. And eventually she opened up and told me how horrific her life had been and the stuff that she had to endure. Fortunately for me, as a Toastmaster, I had the privilege of helping a young lady with her speech about surviving domestic abuse. And I had her voice in my ear the whole time. She doesn't need a hero, Neil. She just needs somebody to confirm and reaffirm that she's made the right decision. And that's all I did that day, was walk with her. I gave her my cell phone and I let her make a phone call to a crisis line. And they sent a rescue team to meet us on the trail. It was in that moment that I realized how much difference one individual can make in somebody's life. When we got to the head of that trail, I was terrified for the first time. You see, walking the trail, I knew he could come from behind or he could come from in front of us. But at that trail that intersected the road, there were 4 areas he could come from. And I didn't rest easy until that van pulled up and the ladies who were there to rescue her opened the window and asked me who I was. And I explained to him what I was doing out there. walking to raise awareness for suicide and mental health. And they realized I was who I said I was. And she got up in that van. She jumped back down and gave me a great big hug and said, thank you for everything. And I realized in that moment that we all have the power to be everything to someone. I carried on that day and for the next 4 or 5 days walking to Ottawa. But when I was in Ottawa and I watched those flags wave and I stood in front of the eternal flame, I felt my phone vibrate. I didn't answer it right away. I waited until I had a moment and I opened it and there was a text message. Mr. Dunsmore, she is fine, she is safe, and she's not going back. It was the best text I ever got. Who are you worried about? That name that just popped into your head, and we all have one. Pick up the phone, reach out, reconnect. You may just find in that moment to that someone, you are everything. Ladies and gentlemen, as Rotarians, we are called to put service above self. I call on you all to reach out and serve for a higher purpose. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you very much. Erin will take care of the question and answer session before we thank our speaker.
If anyone has any questions and would like to ask, feel free to post them in the Q&A. You can also post them in the chat. I can see them. So Neil, I'm gonna start out with a question.
Sure.
I'm just curious, what, if any, involvement your Rotary Club or other Rotarians had in the preparation of your journey?
Well, my Rotary Club was very involved with supporting me, just encouraging me. The walk was something I needed to do for mental health myself. All I asked of my Rotary family, and we are a family, was, just to support me, to tell people about it, to post my posts and repost my posts. And, one of the things I'm proudest of there, Erin, is they did such a good job of that. I didn't have any major corporate sponsors. The gentleman who trained me to do this walk, he does a lot of these, and he's actually out there canoeing from Port Severn to Ottawa this year, 750 kilometers. He left yesterday morning. Peter Vile's his name, and you can Google him. He's done all these crazy things. Peter has corporate sponsors, and they do a money match for him. I set a target of raising $27,000, and what I'm proudest of is that we raised $27,000 in the end, but most of it was individual donors. Actually, all of it was individual donors. I had some small business people, but they donated out of their own pocket. I didn't have a single corporate sponsor. And for me to be able to do that shows how much my Rotary Club pushed it out there, shared it with their friends, and a lot of them donated money. And to me, it was a real community event. To get $27,000 raised in small donations was, I'm so grateful for them. That's all I can say, is they're the best.
Thanks. So as you've come back now and we're still in this pandemic, and you reflect on what you've learned from that journey and what you saw on that journey, what advice do you have for all of us Rotarians, as we're dealing with people, right? Listening to some of the things you said about basically being kind to one another. We never know what battles we're fighting. What advice do you have?
Well, the advice is fairly simple, and I put this in the book, that people are afraid to reach out, especially when it comes to mental health. So my book is called Reflections in the Ripple: Steps to stop the silence of mental health, because everybody talks about mental health. But when you have a mental health issue, it silences you and you don't reach out to people. So it's incumbent on other people like you and I to look around at our friends and say, you know what, they've changed, something's different. And we don't do that. We don't call them up and say, hey, are you all right? Because we're afraid of the conversation. We're afraid of making a mistake. I don't know how to help them. So the stories I shared with you today, I mean, Don is the exception. Don understood knees and he could actually help me, but Norman couldn't help me with dogs. He couldn't help me in that moment. It was his presence. It was the fact that knowing that I was tied to something bigger than myself that brought me in. And what I say to people is just pick up the phone and start the conversation. Arm yourself accordingly. So have your crisis lines, have your hotlines. Have it here in my community. There's a hotline called Here 24/7, which is strictly for people who are in a crisis and contemplating suicide. You don't have to talk them down. You just have to give them the numbers and help them make the phone call to the professionals. Just connect them with the professionals. It's not rocket science, but we all step back and we're afraid of it. As a former crisis negotiator, it was my job when inmates were suicidal to go in and talk them down. And those are difficult conversations to have. And one of the things I learned over that time is that people are afraid to ask the question. There's another story I didn't share with you today. It's also in the book, where somebody reached out internationally because they had actually taken the pills already. They were planning on suicide and they were calling me because they were a distant relative and they just wanted to thank me for doing the walk. I asked them point blank, are you thinking about suicide? Are you going to take your own life today? And he said yes. And that was me called into action to get him the help that he needed. People are afraid to ask that question because they think, oh, I'll put that thought in their mind. The thought's either there or it's not, but you need the answer. And here's the news flash. They won't lie to you about it. If they're suicidal and they're thinking about it, they're going to tell you. That's your call to action. At the very least, if you don't know anybody else, call 911 and send help. But make sure you let them know the person they're dealing with is in a mental health crisis, because that changes the way the police interact. But just ask, get them the help, know the crisis numbers. Don't be afraid. That's the biggest thing. Don't be afraid to reach out. We all know people that are struggling. And sometimes, if they're not suicidal, just talking to them about their problems, just listening is 90% of the battle.
Thank you. So we have a question here. How did COVID affect your walk?
Well, wasn't that something? Isn't it something? It's still going on. So I had planned this walk and I was out doing training for it. And then COVID hit. And I'll never forget the day where they locked us down, which was, I think, the first 3 days of March. And I got a text message from my good friend Peter, who was training me. And he's the big, bold, all caps, no traffic. Get your boots on. We're going on the road. And so we got to walk on roads and train properly, get off treadmills. So from that standpoint, COVID actually helped me there, because people were locked down and Peter and I could walk and walk and walk. My business as a motivational speaker was shut down. People had sent their employees home. I'm a conflict guy. I teach corporations how to deal with conflict. You imagine how many of them said to me, Neil, no more conflict because everybody's at home. They don't have to work in the office. There's no conflict in the office. They're all gone. So I had nothing to do. And so I just put my head down and trained. I don't think I'd have finished this walk. I would have, but I think I would have struggled much more if it hadn't have been for COVID. But the biggest thing, the walk would have been a lot longer. The amount of people that I met on that trail, because it was COVID and the trails weren't packed. I think if the trails were packed, I would have, kept going past people, but you get lonely. So you strike up conversations. So I probably would have had a lot more conversations that would have slowed me down. But in COVID, when people were out there and you're out there alone for 8 hours a day and somebody walks by, you can't help. You have got to talk to them. I'm an extrovert. You might be able to tell that. I have to talk to people. And when you're out there and people come by and you haven't seen anybody for 8 hours, you say, hey, how are you? And you don't just keep walking. You look them in the eye and you say, how you doing? And people go, what are you doing out here? So I'm raising awareness for suicide and mental health. And all of a sudden, boom, I got to talk to you. And I think almost everybody that stopped to talk to me had a story about a brother or a sister or a neighbor or a coworker. every one of them had their life touched by suicide and or mental health. And so I had some fabulous conversations with people out there. So from that standpoint, I guess COVID was good for me. I don't wish it on anybody. I wish there was a different way that I could have done this, but having few people out there, I had great conversations, really great conversations. And with people who, I say it and I don't say it lightly, this walk, it actually changed me to my very soul. I don't walk by anybody, even in downtown Fergus now. I make eye contact and I watch to make sure people are okay. And if they're not, I certainly step up and ask them what's going on.
Do you think that, given the time frame and it being in COVID, do you think that you had more aha moments, more insights, more reflections on mental health because of that? Do you think it would have been different had you not been in COVID?
It could have been. I think what the biggest thing that COVID did for me, and I hope it's done it for all of you, is that when you're isolated and away from people, we have that, it's intrinsic in all of us. You need that human connection. And I think what COVID gave me was the opportunity to have bigger and better conversations and to relish and cherish those conversations. And so from that standpoint, it really did benefit me. But had it not been there, I think still being out there and alone, I would have looked for people who were willing to engage me in conversation, and I still would have done it. And I am, when I say that it's the hidden pandemic mental health crisis in this country, we will get over COVID. We will solve COVID. We're already doing it. But the mental health crisis is as varied and different as each and every individual is. And so is the solution. So it takes constant work. And that's why we can't give up on it. We have to keep going. And that's my Rotary Club is helping with that. We're having an event on October 2nd. It will be kind of like a book launch for me. And all the proceeds of the book sold. And I'll say this to you as Rotarians, any Rotarian who buys a copy of my book, 100% of the proceeds goes to my Rotary Club's mental health initiatives. So that's kind of what they're doing now. So it's my way to give back to my Rotary Club. They work so hard to make this a success for me. I'm now giving it back. I've written a book. I had to write the book to get it out of my head so I could sleep at night. And now we'll use the book to raise funds for Integrated Youth Services Network, which is a Rotary initiative out of Guelph. And all the clubs around here are supporting that. So we'll be raising money on October 2nd. It's a big dinner. I'll send a flyer to Sue and she can share it with you guys. But those are the next steps for us.
Can you share with everyone which Rotary Club is yours?
Fergus Elora Rotary Club. So there are two. I live in the township of Center Wellington, which is Fergus, Elora, Bellwood, Pilkington, and Garifraxa counties. Townships, sorry. So they've all been combined, and there are two Rotary clubs here. The Center Wellington Rotary Club, who's been very supportive as well. They don't know me from Adam, but they stepped up to help. They had me come speak to the club, and they made a donation. They're just being Rotarians, and the two clubs work very closely together. But I'm the Fergus Elora Rotary Club. We're 50 years old, and we meet every Tuesday at the Aboyne, the Wellington County Museum in Aboyne. I have to think about that because we just changed locations.
Excellent. So what background in your life motivated you to be a mental health advocate?
So two things. First, as a crisis, no, that'll be second. So first, I have a brother who has struggled with mental health issues over the years, and he has attempted suicide 12 times. So I walked for him, and just to let him know that there's people here to help him and to ensure that he has the courage to reach out. And there we had a member of our family in Scotland who reached out to me on the walk, and we managed to save his life. So the family connection for me is first and foremost. Second, I spent 10 years as a crisis hostage negotiator in the Ministry of Correctional Services. And people always say, oh, what an interesting career that must have been. Well, there were very few hostage takings. There were daily, weekly, and sometimes daily crisis interventions where I would have to intervene because an inmate was suicidal and had thoughts of suicide. So I understood how how rampant, even though it's hidden, the mental health crisis in this country is. So I've always, since I left corrections, I've always tried to help as much as I can. And this was just a way to raise it to the next level. And it sure has. The Canadian Mental Health Association of Wellington Waterloo actually named an award after me, the Neil Dunsmore Power of One Award. And we're giving that out to somebody this year who worked hard to for the preservation of life and the prevention of suicide this year. So that's kind of interesting. That was an honor I didn't expect. But the Canadian Mental Health Association understands the power of conversation and the power of connections. And that's why they gave me the award.
That's wonderful. So as I'm sure you're very aware, there are a lot of people who find it difficult to talk about and report mental health, as over physical health, right? So we're very easily to diagnose and talk about physical health issues, but it's a little more challenging for some people to talk about mental health. Do you have any tips as to how to approach those conversations to get people to understand it's the same thing?
Yeah, to me, I'm just putting my email address in the chat box because I saw some people asking for it. Having the conversations is key. And what stops us is the fear. And I said that before, is the fear that we'll say something wrong. You know what? Take the word mental health out of it and just call people and talk to them. If somebody is struggling and it's happening in front of you and you can see it, just remain calm. And your key is to get help. Ask them if it's okay if you call somebody who can help them, and educate yourself. I have those numbers on my phone. I have the here 24/7 number for here. I have a provincial-wide crisis number, and I know when I call our local police force, because this is something that's happened in Wellington County, we have impact teams, and we activate those impact teams as soon as we find out there's a mental health crisis. If that person is, and I said that earlier, make sure you tell them that the person has mental health issues, because they send different officers. And we had one that ended tragically this week in our town, but it was called in as a domestic. So they sent regular officers, and it turned out to be a mental health situation that went bad quickly. And it's a tragedy for everybody. But that fear around, say, hey, I noticed that you're not yourself. Don't be afraid to say that. I notice you're not. Is there anything going on that I can help you with? Those are the questions that you ask, and you'd be surprised at how many people confide in you. And then you can help them get the help. If somebody broke their leg or broke their arm, you wouldn't hesitate to call them up. Hey, I hear you broke your arm. You okay? But because it's mental health, we're afraid of it. Nobody rushes in to sign your head. They'll sign your cast, right? And that's the stigma of mental health. And that's what I really want people to stop. Just ask your friends, are you okay? I notice you're acting a little bit differently, and I'm not making a judgment because we all got crap going on in our life. But if there's anything I can help with, I'm here. That knowledge, that feeling of knowing that people have recognized it, that does two things. Either they tell you and you help them through it, or they start thinking about it. Oh, wow, people are noticing this behavior. Maybe I should call somebody. But if you don't notice it, we very rarely notice those small changes in ourselves until they become really big and we're in crisis. But if people can reach out and talk to each other, it's basically the art of conversation. It really is. And just talking to people, let them know, I care. I care. And if you see somebody that you think is in trouble and they're a stranger, here's a news flash. People are more readily willing and able to talk to complete strangers about their deepest problems than they are friends, because they have to go back to work and face those friends the next day, or they have to go to the party next week and face those friends. You would be surprised. When I was out there and I asked the people, how you doing? They would just unload, because it's a stranger. They're never going to see me again. So they were actually honest and open about what was going on. And fortunately, I was able to give them phone numbers that they could call. And that's easy to do. Just Google it when we're done here, the crisis line in your area. And they'll give you numbers, and just put them on your phone. And if you see somebody, get them to help.
I really like your idea of just removing, mental health or physical health and just calling it health. I think that's a great tip.
Yeah, and that's there's an election on. So if there's anybody here who's running, That's the biggest problem with the mental health system in this country. It is funded through philanthropy. Rotarians have to have fundraisers for mental health. Lions clubs have to have fundraisers for mental health. We have to get people money for addiction by having walkathons and walking to Ottawa. The regular health, the physical health, is funded by taxpayers' dollars. Now, I'm not one that's going to run around and say we need to raise taxes, we need to raise taxes. But what we need to be is fair here. If you're going to end the mental health crisis that's in this country, you have to start funding mental health the same way you fund physical health. And we have to, it should be, people should be able to go anywhere to get that mental health they need. They shouldn't rely on organizations being propped up by philanthropy, but that's the way it is. And it's going to be a long time and take a lot of public pressure to change that.
You got to hear from one of our attendees. And I don't know if we mentioned this, Neil, but we are international. So I'm actually in Michigan. I'm in the US.
I was going to say, Aaron, I detect an American accent on you.
Yes.
And I didn't realize you were an international club. That's awesome. That's just awesome.
Yes.
I think we need more of that. I've got an international Rotary club, Toastmasters club that I spoke to, and they're from around the world. And that's one of the silver linings in COVID. Because we couldn't go around, we started reaching out. And I'm an international speaker now because I have literally spoken around the world in the middle of all of this, something that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. And one thing is consistent. The mental health crisis is the same in every single country in the world. When I gave this speech in Ireland, a different version of it, mind you, but in Ireland, the people were in tears. They were like, oh my God. This is exactly what I'm going through. This is what I went through. This is what my brother went through. And we've had some great conversations. And it's amazing to be a world that we are today with all this technology. And yet here we are again with the biggest crisis being mental health. And it all stems down to the one-on-one, face-to-face connections that we need to get people through this.
Well, Neil, I greatly appreciate it. And I know on behalf of our district and everyone in attendance, we very much appreciate you being here. You made a comment very early on in your presentation that said, you talked about the people who helped you get here. And as we've been talking, we think about fighting our silent battles. And you talked about the women that you met along the way and just never knowing what somebody's going through and to be kind. I went into my daughter's preschool room to meet her teacher last week, and all over the place is little bumblebees, and it says, be kind everywhere. And just remembering that we're Rotarians, and you said service above self is the true meaning of life. And I think that, that goes along with what I said earlier, and that there are people just like that all over the world that are not necessarily Rotarians. And we just need to remember to be kind and to look out for one another, especially right now. So I greatly appreciate you being here and all the information you shared and your wonderful stories. I might recruit you at about 7:30 to come read my daughter's bedtime story to her. That would be excellent.
Well, I do a pretty good bedtime story.
She'll Zoom. It'll be fine.
Okay. Actually, I do have a friend who's a grandfather for the first time, and that's how he reads the bedtime stories, is on Zoom, because you can't be there in person yet. So it's awful. It's awful hard. But
I know. Well, we appreciate your story and your information, and thank you for providing your email address. I know there are a few people who messaged me that would like to follow up with you. So on behalf of everybody, again, thank you. And to everybody in attendance, let's go and serve to change lives. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.